Mr. Jones, you have struck a better blow for freedom than if you'd spent a whole year in the trenches. Welcome to the Indiana Jones universe, the podcast that explores the incredible adventures of the world's greatest globe-trotting archaeologist, Indiana Jones. Each episode is a casual and somewhat humorous, opinionated conversation with a slightly sophisticated analytical study of the expanded universe content from the Indiana Jones franchise. You can expect to find discussions about the adventures of young Indiana Jones, the further adventures of Indiana Jones comic books, the Staff of Kings and Emperor's Tomb video games, the Indiana Jones novels, the original soundtracks, and so much more. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Indiana Jones Universe podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and today we are extremely excited to continue our interview series for Young Indiana Jones, which includes behind-the-scenes conversations with some of the talented filmmakers who contributed to this extraordinary and ambitious television series. Today, our special guest is an award-winning Australian filmmaker who is one of the primary directors on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. This filmmaker was responsible for directing the majority of the Old Indy bookend segments with George Hall, as well as 5 terrific episodes of the series: British East Africa 1909, Mexico 1916, London 1916, Treasure of the Peacock's Eye, and Mystery of the Blues. So with that said, I'm thrilled to introduce our special guest today, Mr. Carl Schultz. Welcome to the podcast.
Nice that you have invited me. Thank you.
Of course. It's great to have you here today. And let's just get started right from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself. How did your film career begin? And how did that ultimately lead to your role on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles?
Well, I would have to go back quite a long way, of course. I started my film and television career in Australia at the ABC television studios in Sydney. I did a technician course, which included all aspects of film and television production at that time. Television at that time was quite early in Australia. I'm talking about 1960. So it was still black and white television. I did a 4-year course in which I did all the functions of a television studio, including sound, recording, camera, lighting, editing, and so on and so on. So by the end of that course, we had to make a decision as to which particular functions we would want to carry on in, and I chose camera operating. And that's what I did for the next 10 years, working on all kinds of productions, light entertainment, dramas, documentaries, music programs, opera, so on and so on. So by the end of the 10 years, I had a very good education in television production, and I worked with many different directors on drama productions, which was my strongest interest at that time. I also bought myself a 16mm camera and did some documentaries and sporting programs, etc. And I started making some short films of my own. Which was noticed by some of the directors that I was working with, and they invited me to do some second unit directing for them, and that was my earliest experience of directing on film.
Wonderful. And how did your experience with the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles originally begin, and what were your initial conversations like with George Lucas and Rick McCallum?
Well, it was quite wonderful. They were very welcoming. Rick McCallum got in touch with me because he wanted to talk to me about doing a film together with him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was working with Dennis Potter, who was, and they made a number of television series. And so I met up with Rick at that time. but the film never came to be. The financing was never found for it. But we had a very good relationship with Rick. I got to know him quite well. So, yeah, and then I was going to do another film in America after The Seventh Sign, and I was on my way to start production, but at the last minute, again, the production was pulled, the financing fell apart. And I was in London on my way to America when this happened, and having let our house in Sydney, we couldn't immediately go back. But luckily, Rick at the same time again found out that my film was pulled. He contacted me in London, and he said, "Why don't you come up and talk to George? We would like you to meet him, and you might want to do some of these episodes we're just starting to set up." So I met with them, and that's how it started.
Wow, that sounds terrific. And, the original concept for this series was to use it as sort of this teaching tool to educate students about historical events. Was it challenging for you to differentiate this series so heavily from the Indiana Jones films, or did you kind of align your creative vision with their ideas?
As far as I was concerned, yes, that was a great thing that he wanted it to be as an educational tool. But really, Indiana Jones was well established. We knew what the genre was. We knew that it had to be highly entertaining and appeal to a wide audience. So the formula for it was very clear in my mind what needed to happen. But it was at the very beginning, you see, because they were still in the process of writing the scripts. So the central studio was to be Shepperton Studios in London, and Rick was already beginning to gather the crew and the production staff, while George was doing the writing with a group of writers in Skywalker. At that time, it was just myself and one other director, Jim O'Brien, and we were invited to go up and spend some time with the writers up at Skywalker
Oh, wow.
during the writing period, just to kind of get into the atmosphere of what was needed and spend time just absorbing everything that was being talked about. So that was very exciting, because I once before had a similar kind of experience with George Miller in Australia. We did a couple of television series after the success of Mad Max. Again, we worked in a kind of collaborative setup with directors and writers working together at the very conception of it. So in a way, to be involved with the Young Indiana series at its conceptual stage was quite wonderful and quite exciting for me. So yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a very unique experience that was quite unordinary from most productions. And it's interesting to hear you talk about the fact that you got to be at Skywalker Ranch kind of at the initial stages of the series with all of the screenwriters. Do you have any more sort of stories to share about your experience, maybe kind of contributing to some of those, early episode ideas?
Well, the thing was that George is very thorough, and he had a wonderful research department. Well, only just 2 or 3 people, but they were very thorough in investigating or looking into the historical background of each episode, each story. So I personally was not involved in the discussions. We were sitting in, listening, but we were working with wonderful writers. Jonathan Hales, Frank Darabont, Rosemary Ann Sisson. So I was part of the listening in, being, I didn't have much to contribute at that point other than just try and figure out exactly where my position would be once we got started. And at the same time, we were going back and forth between London and Skywalker. We started casting for the first couple of episodes. So that was happening at the same time.
And one of the things that George Lucas also wanted to do with this television series was sort of experiment with a lot of new digital filmmaking techniques. What types of challenges and or benefits came from taking this approach?
Yes, well, that was the beginning of that kind of digital manipulation. Again, it was very exciting, and of course, that kind of technology is now very far advanced. It was the beginnings of it then, and so George used that series as an experimental stage for other projects that were to come afterwards. Those sequences where manipulation needed to be done, they were carefully designed. I would know what I needed to do on the set in order to give the post-production team the material to use. I mean, at that time it was fairly basic. It was like multiplying the horses in the Pancho Villa episode, when
Oh, yeah.
Indy's captured, I had 10 horses, but we made it look like 30 horses by multiplying it, shooting the scene 3 ways, in 3 positions with the camera locked off.
Wow.
And then they would put it together. And at Colosimo, the funeral, that scene, that was thousands of extras. Well, we had about maybe 80 extras or something like that. And the street was just a little backlot. But of course, by doing the matte paintings, all that was done in post-production. And it was very well organized and it was taken care of. So it was very easy for me because I didn't have to worry about that. That was just done after the shoot.
And for this television series, George Lucas kind of implemented somewhat of an unconventional approach of hiring different directors for every episode. He kind of wanted each episode to be like a separate feature film. Did your responsibilities change at all compared to previous projects you had worked on?
I think I came to be chosen or to be invited was because I got to know Rick, and because of that film that we were trying to make earlier, about 3-4 years earlier. That didn't happen. He got to know me, and he knew what was, what I had to offer, or he believed in what I would bring to it. I mean, my approach to filmmaking is really very simple. It has to be, there has to be a good story, that it's the people that matter, and it has to be told in an efficient way, in an entertaining way. It has to move on. There shouldn't be any dead spots in it. Yeah, and also, George was very happy to have, he was very pleased with the films that I've shot, whatever he had looked at. But I think all the directors who were hired were chosen largely by the suggestions, I think, came from Rick, because he had a wide, a wide experience of European filmmakers, and he had worked with a number of them before. But of course, it had to be approved by George as well. So, but most of it, I mean, the organizing of this series was so huge, and I couldn't think of anybody more able to do it than Rick. He was an amazing organizer.
Yeah, and it sounds like you had quite a close relationship with Rick McCallum. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit on what he was like as a producer on the set?
Well, highly efficient, very, very easy, very thorough. Nothing was a problem. I mean, the series was shot in so many different places. I actually don't know how he managed to be able to set everything up so efficiently.
Yeah.
In so many different locations all around the world, in Africa, in Asia. Most of it is largely to do with his efficiency. As a human being, as a person, we had wonderful times together. We liked each other. We had fun. We had dinners together. Now, also the fact was that because we were shooting on 16 millimeter, and of course he was very efficient. It was a very tight production. We didn't have that much money, to do it. We had to move fast. The process was that from the negative, we went straight to a digital image, and that way the quality could be, far better than normal 60mm would be. I also mentioned the fact that I came out of Australian television. So did Simon Windsor.
Yeah.
I think both of us had a way of coming to it in a way which was a result of our experience in Australia, which was a very free and open kind of working in film, because it was just kind of beginning there. The Australian film wave came out of it, and I think that was the attraction for both of us in a way, why we were chosen and why we did most of the episodes. Rick liked working with us, and George liked working with us. He was getting exactly what he wanted from both of us. We knew how to shoot this stuff. I had a few discussions with George, and it was very simple because I could say what was needed. We didn't need much explanation. We knew what was expected. But he was very kind to me. I remember him once saying, getting your dailies is a bit like Christmas, because you get everything that you expected, that you asked for, and then you get an extra little package that's a surprise. And I enjoy working that way.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talk about Simon Windsor. We interviewed him a couple of years ago, and it's interesting because, most of the directors who got hired on this show either did 1 or 2 episodes, except for you and Simon Windsor, who did quite a number of them. So that's interesting. And even though Young Indy was a separate project, the series still tried to incorporate many sort of Indiana Jones characteristics to sort of convey how Indy's boyhood years turned him into the globetrotting archaeologist that everybody knew. Were there any specific elements that you wanted either Sean Patrick Flannery or Corey Carrier to sort of incorporate into your episodes to maybe remind us of Harrison Ford's portrayal of Indiana Jones?
Not in that sense, but both of them, well, the young boy, Corey, he's a child, he's a 10-year-old. So, there's not much other than the intelligence and the innocence that he has, and the kind of excitement. Whereas the 19-year-old or 18-year-old Indy is very much closer to Harrison Ford character. And of course, he had studied it very closely. He had watched all the movies, and of course, in casting him, he was the obvious choice. We looked at a few people, but it was obvious that he was the closest thing to what. He studied his mannerisms. Physically, he was very agile. So I didn't really have to do anything very much about that. I just had to make sure. I mean, they both came quite well prepared. The young boy, unfortunately, was kind of coached by his parents, because his parents were often there, and he would come on set with these preset, pre-rehearsed gestures, and that I didn't really, we just got away with it, I think, because I didn't like, his parent to interfere, or they were just trying to help him remember his lines and so on, but they also made him practice certain gestures and mannerisms that were somewhat over the top and unnecessary. I would have liked him to be a little bit, not to be interfered with by others, basically. And I actually had words to say to the parents at the time. please don't, train him. He's fine. He's okay. Because I like working with young, children. But choosing them is the most important thing. Casting is the most important thing. Once you have the cast, there's not a lot of manipulation that you can do.
And since you were part of the production so early on, did you have any influence over the casting at all?
Yes and no. I mean, because we were all kind of part of the process, we were there, shooting the some of the tests. Um, Remy Boudouin, he was cast by George, basically. Well, we had casting directors in London and in Los Angeles and in New York as well. They would be presented to, they would shoot auditions and then we would look at it, but the choice would be made by George. I mean, there might be for instance, Tom Courtney. I really wanted Tom Courtney to
Yeah.
read, and he came in and he was, I thought he was great. And of course, Liz Hurley, the very first, I mean, she was so young then and very beautiful. She hadn't done much before that. And when I looked at it, I thought she was really quite good in the episode, really,
Yeah.
quite touching. In fact, I think all the young people in the series performed very well. They were so enthusiastic to be part of it. So Liz Hurley was working on some film in Barcelona. I had to fly there to meet her,
Wow.
to see, to talk to her whether she would be right for the part. So that was before we started shooting, because the first two episodes were the London episode and Egypt episode. And Jim O'Brien was to shoot the Egypt episode and I was to do the London episode. So that's what we were both concentrating on. And they were the first two episodes. And then, so they were not done in the sequence of the series. I think then we did Mexico after that, and then British East Africa after that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was one of the interesting things about this series is that there were so many fantastic actors and actresses who, kind of burst onto the scene with this show, one of their first ever roles and went on to have phenomenal careers. So the casting directors spotted all of this amazing talent. Now, obviously, Indiana Jones has a certain sort of visual tone. And what are the kinds of things you pay attention to as a director to fit into that tone? And does that ever come into conflict with your own personal style?
Well, no, it didn't, because I knew what the genre required. It needed to be shot in a certain way, which allowed for the kind of editing that has to happen afterwards. And George is an editor more than anything else. Well, he's a writer, he's a wonderful everything, but I think editing is his love, I think.
Yeah.
And so I knew what I had to give him. Well, I got to edit as well. We had 2 weeks of editing. After we shot the episode, I would go to Skywalker
Wow.
and spend 2 weeks with the editor and then present that to George. And then George would look at it again and make adjustments. He could do whatever he wanted, obviously. You're asking about the style of shooting. So again, Simon and I kind of came out of that Australian filmmaking mentality, and I think we both knew what was needed. On the other hand, the director of the Egypt episode, Jim O'Brien, I think had a very different style of shooting. Instead of using a master shot and then cover everything in close-ups, he would try and direct the scene in a more fluid way and tell the story that way rather than cut by cut. And I don't think it suited George. He didn't come back to do another episode. In fact, I did some shooting on those episodes to complement it.
Oh, wow.
It's almost a shooting script. I mean, if you read the script, it's straightforward. It's a blueprint, and I find it very easy. So if you get a good script, you know what to do immediately. There's no hesitation about it. And we knew that it's Indiana Jones, and of course the music, the speed of it, the energy of it had to be that.
So let's start talking about some of these episodes in more detail here, and we'll go in chronological order. So let's start with British East Africa, 1909, which is also known as the first part of Passion for Life. You kind of alluded to it earlier, but this is your one episode with Corey Carrier. So what was it like working with him in this episode?
Very friendly, very nice. I liked him very much. Before we shot the whole episode, I went with him and a wildlife photographer to shoot some second unit with Corey and the Maasai boy Isaac in the bush with the wildlife photographer Hugh Mars that I knew. I suggested that they get him because he of course knew the place, the Masai Mara. He had filmed there many times before, and so it was just Hugh Mars, me, his assistant, a gunman to help to sit next to us, and that was it. We took the boys. We had about 2 weeks, so the shots of the wild with the lions. I mean, we actually put them into places in close proximity to animals.
Wow.
I don't think it would be allowed today. But like I say, it was just us. And Hugh was knowledgeable about the wildlife and the animals. He knew how to get close enough to them and then have the kids come out of the car and put them in between us and shoot.
That's really interesting. You talk about that process a little bit, and that there was sort of like, again, this sort of second unit doing all of that wildlife footage. And, as a result, what sort of like cinematic techniques were essential for capturing this wildlife footage? Because as you mentioned, I would imagine it was, somewhat dangerous to be doing this.
It could have been, but we were careful, to make sure that we were in good distance away from them. But yeah, I mean, we were very close. But because I trusted Hugh Miles, because he was not very knowledgeable about the animals and where we could go with them. I mean, some of it is stock footage, cut in with the boys running through the bush and so on, so on.
Right.
But there's little bits of it, like the friendship between the two boys, is developing. So much of that was just, I had the kids and we were just wandering through the place trying to communicate. So the little Maasai boy picks up because I saw them chewing these things, those sticks. And they brush their teeth with it. So that thing is, just made up.
Oh, wow.
Just, the toothbrush.
Wow, that's really interesting.
I mean, some of those things, they can't. Some of it can be written in Skywalker, in the writer's studio, and some of it has to be shot and made up on location, and so it's a combination of the two. I mean, mostly you got the blueprint, and that's what you are doing. You're shooting the blueprint, but then in between, you can do other things, and I enjoy working that way.
Indy and Meto, develop such a strong friendship in this episode, and despite their language barrier, they're still able to communicate with each other and search for the oryx together. And there's also a fantastic scene when Indy learns about the location of the oryx from one of the Maasai elders. So given the language barrier, what was it like working with these native tribes and the boy who played Meto?
Well, it was quite wonderful. They were very welcoming. I mean, the Maasai are a wonderful people, elegant, and they are fearless. The way they respect all the animals. Quite wonderful thing for me to experience that, because we went into actual Maasai villages They were not sets built, they were Maasai villages, when he goes to see where the oryx are.
Now, there are so many scenes that are quite amazing, of Indian Meto traversing across the African safari, as we mentioned. And I would imagine that it was probably an absolutely, amazing experience to be filming this episode on location in such a remote part of the world. What was your experience like filming this episode in Kenya?
Well, it was very exciting. It was quite wonderful. And in fact, I asked my wife and two young children to come and visit while we were there as well. So we lived for those 2 weeks in this encampment where wildlife photographers come, and at night we would be visited by elephants. My children were at that time 10 and 12 years old, and we had a wonderful experience. Yeah.
And we learned so much about Theodore Roosevelt's genuine interest in ecological preservation in this episode. And I think it's so compelling to have Indy contest him at the very end. It shows us that, even somebody as famous as Theodore Roosevelt is capable of learning his own lesson. So, with this series, how do you approach creating such an authentic relationship between such a significant historical figure and a fictitious adventurer like Indiana Jones?
Well, I think this is very much a part of George directing the writers to find that connection, because these are not event episodes, they are mostly to do with people. So it's the people that matter. I think he even says so in I saw one of his interviews recently. Yes, the story is very, very important, of course, but it's the people who make the story. And so that connection is always always there, most importantly. And in fact, all the episodes, whatever it is, whether it's the London episode or the Roosevelt or the Tom Courtney, I always found that in each one of those episodes, there's a scene, or might only be 2 minutes or a minute long, where they connect. The rest of the episode might be wild and fast and moving on, but there's these moments, these couple of minutes that they have together where they find some truth about life.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's it's suggested in the script, but I think when you actually get onto the set with the actors, that's when I become a director, I suppose, where you make sure that those scenes are given the time and the quietness that they require.
Let's move on now to Mexico, 1916, also known as the second part of Spring Break Adventure. This starts, of course, your numerous episodes working with Sean Patrick Flannery. So, what was your experience like working with him in this episode?
Well, he's so fit, he's so agile that, and this required him to be that very much. I mean, that he became a wonderful horse rider. And of course, Vic Armstrong, I think, spent quite a lot of time with him. I mean, he was called on to do some amazing stuff. It's not a stand-in, it's him doing it. Jumping on the horse, on a moving horse. Very dangerous, some of it. When you look at it, you think... but he threw himself into it, fearless, absolutely fearless. And also, he's a highly intelligent young man, and I think from the very beginning, when we first met him, didn't get much time to rehearse anything once this series got underway. But for the first 2 episodes, the London episode, I had some time with him where we spent quite a lot of time talking about things. And he was well prepared in terms of the Indiana Jones movies, but with the London episode with Liz Hurley and Sean, we had some time. But as I said, that was about the only time where we, once the series got underway, it was just they were cast, and they would come prepared.
Now, at the beginning of this episode, Indy and his cousin Frank arrive at the Mexican border and stop in a town called Columbus. I sort of noticed how the setting and the tone of this scene totally feels like a tribute, perhaps, to, classic westerns. Where was this scene shot, and do you have any behind the scenes stories to share about the locations and sets for this episode?
Yeah, this was shot in Almeria in Spain on a set that was used for the spaghetti westerns. And the sets were, falling to bits, but we had to, but that's where we did most of it, yeah. I think because of those sets, they kind of define that style, that spaghetti western, image. A lot of horses and a lot of wild stunts.
And after Pancho Villa and his men attack the town of Columbus, Indy chases after someone, on a horse. And it's such a thrilling sequence because it, sort of reminds us of Harrison Ford's iconic portrayal of Indiana Jones. And we see him as a boy kind of starting to become that character. But with, a lot of these scenes, especially with horses, how do you as a director approach shooting complex chase sequences like this?
Usually what has to happen is that you shoot the main events with the actors, and then you have a lot of other footage that can be shot by a second unit. It's a combination of the two. Because it was Vic Armstrong who was the second unit on that particular episode, he did those sequences. I would shoot the beginnings, and it's quite a long sequence. I shot some of the wide shots, some of the close-ups of Indy on the horse. It developed into a longer sequence than I thought could be. But again, you see, because there was a lot of material there, and of course George gets the material, I mean, in the editing, and he could play with it and build it up into this long sequence. And it's very exciting. I mean, and the music. I was listening to the music there. It's kind of repetitive. It keeps on.
Yeah.
That's the funny thing about that indie music, isn't it? That it never it never stops. It never gives up. Even though you
Yeah.
might stumble and fall, it will keep up. It will get up again and go again.
And Mike Moroff, the actor who played Pancho Villa in this episode, was so committed to the role and, really brought this historical figure to life. What was it like working with him, and what is your approach to working with actors on the set?
I love working with him. Of course, this episode, for him, it was mostly, well, we shot it in Spanish. A lot of the dialogue is, and that was the other thing that was usually that's not allowed in American television. But again, George's insistence that, they speak, and of course, Indy also speaks, had to learn Spanish. And no, he was again physically he was very strong. I thought he made a wonderful punch of it. I think that scene where he says about this is the dirt that we fight for.
Yeah.
That scene, you see, it was shot at the end of the day. We had not a lot of light left. We only had like probably 15 minutes. But I think it's a very strong scene. I think it works quite emotional. It touches you. And Steal My Chickens, I was just going to mention that sometimes you have to work with actors or non-actors who find it very difficult to remember things. And the old man in that scene, where the final thing where he says, they all steal my chickens.
Right.
He had to be revoiced by an actor in post-production.
Oh, wow.
So sometimes you have to build up scenes, make it up. You don't really have it, but you say, well, that's okay because we can fix it. And that's one of the instances of, that. And I think, again, the old man is fine because it's an important thing that he says.
Another fantastic scene in this episode that totally feels like, again, a tribute to the classic Western genre is when George Patton enters the cantina and this fierce gunfight occurs. Now, what type of cinematic techniques are important to consider when you're dealing with such a suspenseful scene like this?
Well, you see that. Well, it's funny because while I'm shooting that, I'm laughing my head off because it is so ripped off.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
let's just do it exactly like they would have done it in the westerns. And the light, the way the light comes in, the way the shadow falls on his face, and it's quite comical with the three of them, in the window. You see that shot, they fall out the window and then they pop up like that. You find that on the day.
Oh, wow.
That's not written. That's just, but it becomes a classic moment.
Yeah, and it's just like it's such a suspenseful scene too, but it becomes so comical when they jump out of the window. So it's a great moment. And this episode has tons of action scenes throughout, especially when Pancho Villa's men attack Ciudad Guerrero with this huge train. As a result, for this particular sequence, what types of stunts and practical effects were required, and sort of what was your overall sort of vision for how this scene would sort of play out?
Again, that was a location shoot. Not a very large area, enclosed, walled. Everything had to happen in the, before that. The train approaching and all that train was borrowed from an old film.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know what film it was, but it was some of it is stock footage. I shot obviously with Indy and Remy on the train, Sean riding the horse, beside and going forward to the changing the tracks. But a lot of the stuff was from an old film. Again, I'm not quite sure exactly where it came from, what it was, but it was married together between, the two things were put together. So I knew, I looked at the footage and I had to shoot things to make sure that the two things would fit together.
I think I'm now remembering that the film that they used was Old Gringo.
Oh,
I
yes.
think I remember hearing that somewhere. Yeah, so I think that might have been that scene.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love working with Pancho. He was one. I enjoyed it very much, that one. But that's what I'm saying about a lot of the set piece. Like the shoot, the gunfight. They're set pieces. You know what's required. You've seen the movies, 100 times before. You just have to, do the same.
Now, there's a really powerful scene in this episode when all of Pancho Villa's men they watch this silent film and this newsreel. And I'm curious, did this scene actually take place in a real movie theater, or was all of that footage just added in post production?
No, the newsreel is. I'm trying to remember where we shot that in Barcelona.
Oh, wow.
In There's another scene, a large mansion there. In there, we shot it in there with the extras in the movie theater. But we set that up.
Now, the final epic fist fight with Demetrios at the end of the episode is, so gritty and intense. And, it's a nice callback to, Jim O'Brien's episode when, Demetrios, this character, stole the jackal headpiece from an Egyptian tomb. And, Indy wasn't able to catch him, but now he sort of is able to get justice this time. I'm curious, was this one of the more challenging scenes to film? It seems like there was a lot going on in this one.
Well, it was well rehearsed and very clearly designed by the stunt coordinator. You go through with the stunt coordinator all the action, all the punches, and you set up each shot accordingly. And it's quite painstaking. It's a slow process. It's not easy, but I always work with two cameras, or as many as I can get, to get the coverage of those things. Yeah, it was an exciting thing to do that one, and it works well. I don't look forward to those things because I know how painstaking it is. On the page, it's only half a page, but it takes all day to shoot. But yeah, I mean, it's got to be done. Got to be done. You got to make sure that you have all the shots that are necessary.
Let's move on now to London, 1916. also known as the second part of Love Sweet Song. This episode features some incredibly talented actresses. Of course, Elizabeth Hurley, and also Vanessa Redgrave, and even the creator of Downton Abbey, Julian Fellows. What was it like working with such talented people in this episode?
Well, the better they are, the more easy is my job. I mean, sometimes well-known actors, can be difficult, but sometimes they're difficult because they are good. I don't know. No, I got on very well with all of them. Margaret Tysak was a wonderful person to work with, very accommodating. Vanessa Redgrave was only in that short bit, and if you cast Vanessa Redgrave, you know what you're going to get.
Exactly.
So you put the camera there, you do the makeup, and we shoot the scene, and that's it. If something goes, not the way it ought to go, then fix it in editing usually. But what I'm saying is that when you work with actors who are so well known, so well established, you have to understand that, and I think that is what is expected. And the Julian playing Churchill, that was a little bit of a push for him, I think, but it's difficult always when you have to impersonate somebody. I don't like that. You dread that, but again, it's difficult. It's difficult for the actor, and it's never quite right. And I didn't think it was quite right there, but what can you do? You can't do anything about that. In a way, it kind of happened with Roosevelt too. I thought that he tried to imitate his voice too much. I remember, thinking, should I do anything about that? Should I say, ease off on the, forget about it, Roosevelt? Just, I think I did speak to him actually in the quiet scene. When the two of them are sitting down and
Oh, yes, looking out over the safari.
yes, and where they have to be somebody else. Instead of the actor being, bringing it from within themselves, they kind of try and put it out onto somebody else. And it's always difficult, but it happens sometimes.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about that. I never really considered that, how, sometimes just impersonating a historical figure and thinking about how to just copy everything that they were and everything that they did sometimes is maybe the opposite of what you want, instead of actually being more.
Exactly. They should just be. They are the person that you're watching, It's them that you have to believe, not some imaginary, other thing.
Right. Now, Indy goes to a suffragette meeting in this episode after he meets Vicky for the first time, and he listens to this incredibly compelling speech. But he sort of realizes that, not everyone is supportive of the suffragettes like he is. As a result, with this sort of scene here, what tone did you sort of want to convey to the audience, and what sort of did you want to communicate?
Well, what I mentioned about that scene is that when you get a scene like that where somebody's making a speech, there's an audience, and somebody has two lines to say, to shout in, I always find those difficult because you can't cast an actor into that one line. So you're going with somebody who is probably going to be an amateur. When I look at a scene, when you get a scene and it has one of those, I try and think, how can I get around this? And of course, often you can't, because it's an important thing that he says.
Now, during the dinner scene with Winston Churchill, Vicky's sort of dedication to the issues of women's suffrage, caused her to sort of accidentally send her trifle flying in the air as they hit Winston Churchill in the face. And what I think is interesting is, sort of despite the serious tone of the historical events that take place in this series, how important do you think it is to also include a, good balance of comedy, and how do you approach that as a director?
Yes, I think humor is always part of life, part of even in the darkest moments, there can be things that you observe as being part of life, part of it. And again, in the spirit of of Indiana Jones, there's always that sense of humor and even the ridiculous, which is part of entertainment, part of that genre. I mentioned one other thing about that episode. When they are having Liz Hurley and Sean test each other's language skills.
Yes.
And because I'm Hungarian, I put in "de magyarul nem beszél."
Right.
I couldn't resist.
That's great.
That was not in the script, but George smiled and let it go. So.
Now, throughout this episode, there are so many incredibly sort of picturesque moments of, Indy and Vicky sort of falling in love with each other. Whether they're walking through the rainy streets of London at night, or sometimes they ride bikes in the English countryside. And so what you have here essentially is sort of, a montage. And with scenes like this, what do you think is sort of, I guess, the secret to sort of capturing these sort of intimate moments of romance?
Well, if you have cast the right people, they will understand. And of course, you have to cover the footage. You shoot scenes that are, that convey that intimacy. So, a number of things come into that. Quite often it's without words. It's just looks. And of course here, the cameraman, the lighting is so important. Now, I should mention that the cameraman, David Tattersall, he was a young cinematographer, came on the series. Again, it was Rick who found him. He had only done one other film, I think, before. He was out of film school.
Oh, wow.
His portrait photography is absolutely wonderful. I think he's one of the best I've worked with. And of course, he went on to do lots of other things after. But some of those portraits, in the night scene where Indy and Liz, they're so beautifully lit, I think.
Oh, they're terrific.
And you hold those shots, you see, you don't have to, you don't need words, you don't need anything else other than just look at them and they tell you the story. And of course, I was very fortunate that summer when we shot, we went to Oxford for those scenes, and some of the fields were covered in poppies, beautiful. I mean, absolutely stunning. So all you do is put the camera there and say, walk through there.
Yeah, right.
And the boating scene, and then some wonderful thing. I loved Vicky sitting in the boat and Indy's pushing it along, and this swan comes up and pecks at her.
Yeah.
Those kind of happy accidents,
That's amazing. And the final moments of this episode, are so poignant and emotional. There's these two sort of short scenes, the sort of dinner scene, and then when Indy leaves on the train to go to basic training. And, it's sort of obvious that Indy and Vicky have these strong feelings for each other, but, the war has, inevitably created this barrier between them. As a result, take us sort of through your creative vision for this scene, and maybe tell us a little bit about, the theme that you wanted to sort of portray in this episode.
It was a very powerfully written scene. I think Rosemary Ann Sisson was the writer of that episode, and she has a wonderful understanding of human emotions and needs, and particularly to do with women. And again, I thought Liz Hurley did it very well for a young actress, to totally believable. And the final scene at the train station too, it's very powerful, I think.
Oh, it's beautiful.
In that, that they are almost there, but they are not.
Yes, exactly.
I also mentioned on that scene, on that train scene, is that sometimes you don't have enough cameras to cover things. And whenever I can get a camera in my hand, I always grab one. And there's just one shot that, I said, give me a camera, please. Because as the train is about to move, and I'm down low, and I swing around as the train starts to move. But I just love to be part of the action sometimes. And because I was a cameraman at one time, I suppose, I can't resist that.
Let's move on now to Treasure of the Peacock's Eye. In this episode, Indy goes on this globe-trotting adventure with his best friend Remy to find a diamond that once belonged to Alexander the Great. What was it like working with Ronnie Couture in this episode, the actor who played Remy?
Yeah, look, he's a wonderful man. He was a comedian, a Belgian comedian, and he worked very hard at learning his lines. And because of his large physique, he found a lot of the things quite difficult. I remember shooting the Prague battle scene, the end of the war.
Yeah.
With him. That's how I think the episode starts with that, doesn't it?
Yes.
Where they're trying to capture the spy, falling over craters and so on. And we had to do it a number of times, because again, we have to have the coverage. And of course, Remy, I felt so sorry for him because he could hardly manage that. I remember having dinner with him. We spent quite a lot of time in between. And I said, that was difficult, wasn't it? And he says, yes. And then we spoke quite a lot of French. I was trying to learn some French at the time. And he said, I say it in English. He said to me, and this is a kind of a French saying, he said, and all the time, my mother thinks that I'm having fun. Here I am slugging my guts out, and they think that this is just easy. I enjoy doing that episode, and I like working with Ronnie, yeah.
Now, obviously, this episode features so many stunning locations. It's this globe-trotting adventure all over the world. I mean, it starts in the trenches, they go to London, then they go to the Trobriand Islands, just all over. So how many countries was this episode shot in, and what was your experience like traveling all over the world to film this episode?
Well, the battle scene, the beginning of the episode is filmed in Prague, and some of the scenes are shot in Prague and in London, and then we went to Thailand, shot the most of it in Phuket in Thailand. We went to get the cast from New Guinea. I went to New Guinea to find the Trobriand Islanders. Yeah, it was quite complicated. But again, you see, it was. We never had any problems other than just the difficulty of getting it, getting from place to place. But again, Rick's team, he managed to always find groups of people in these various locations who were very good, and they did their job very well. It was a difficult episode to shoot. Some of it was. Not as difficult as Simon's episode in the Congo. He was shooting that. I met him in Nairobi because we were both there at the same time when I was doing the second unit I think I was doing the second unit with the wildlife photographer, and he was about to go to the Congo. Yeah.
Now, where did you shoot all of the scenes with Indy and Remy stranded at sea? Was that literally in the middle of the ocean?
Yeah, well, it's just offshore. Just point the camera the way that you don't see anything else. You only see sea.
Now, during Indy and Remy's sort of ambitious pursuit of the diamond, they get attacked by pirates on a steamship. And this is quite an elaborate scene that certainly has a lot of these, kind of exciting fights. What role did sort of the stunts play in this scene, and was this sort of an ambitious scene to pull off?
Again, the stunt coordinator was very good. I think it's Simon
Crane?
I think so, yeah. There were a number of people, but again, Indy, Sean did all his own, the swinging leg and and a bit over the top, like the somersaults and all that sort of thing. With the younger boy, it's a little bit different. They were less Indiana Jonesy.
Now, when Indy and Remy get lost at sea, they get captured by, a native tribe. And, there are some really phenomenal moments, sort of similar to British East Africa, where Indy meets this young boy named Peacock, and, he observes this native ritual. So what was it like working with these native tribes on the Trobriand Islands?
As I said, we had to bring those people in from New Guinea. They came to Phuket in Thailand, and we built this village and some local extras to make up the numbers. But
So was it more staged in comparison to the Maasai elders then?
yes, but the people, the Trobriand Islanders, they were kind of just behaving the way they would behave. So I thought, oh, that was okay. The actual fight scenes and so on, they were designed and set up. But once they had they did their own makeup and everything, So they gave me a present at the end of it. They gave me one of their satchels. They have these satchels they wear on their shoulder with these seashells where they carry their whatever they chew, those leaves.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I love working with Tom Courtenay, of course, in that episode. Once he comes into it.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit more. I mean, Indy meets, the anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski, who, ultimately convinces Indy to pursue archaeology, instead of continuing to search for the diamond. And his performance is just remarkable in this episode. And what was it like working with Tom Courtenay in this episode? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I met Tom in London, before we, to cast him, and he's a wonderful, quiet actor, very thorough in his preparation, and so low key, low. He doesn't bring attention to himself. He's a most unactor-like actor that I've ever met, and it was an absolute pleasure to work with him. Everything is so understated, yet it's crystal clear, what he says.
Yeah.
And one of the most moving things for me was, when he does that follow your dream, when he tells Indy not to chase diamonds, just be yourself, follow your dream. Well, again, just the final scene in that when they say goodbye to each other, to Remy, when he says, I'm not going with you, which is shot at sunset, and I was running a bit low on time on that day, and it had to be done that day. And but you see, sometimes when you push for time, it's good because you're shooting it in a natural light condition. It helps the scene.
Let's move on now to Mystery of the Blues. This episode is incredibly successful at introducing the audience to the fundamentals of jazz. And, there's a lot of diegetic music throughout the episode when Indy watches Sidney Bechet and his band perform. So what sort of research did you do in preparation for this episode? And did you work with the composer of this episode, Joel McNeely?
I always loved jazz. I used to go to jazz clubs when I was living in Sydney as a young man. And I didn't really need to do much preparation other than get the script, select the pieces of music which Joel McNeely had already selected most of it. But we discussed, what songs should be used and so on. We spent quite a lot of time together researching and finding out what pieces of music should be part of the story. So we listened to a lot of recordings that were from the 20s, 30s, 40s. We knew that we had to do the story of Sidney Bechet, but also to try and communicate what jazz is, what the blues is, what gospel music is. I really enjoyed that. It was quite an eye-opener for me. For me, it was a great introduction into black music. And working with that bunch of musicians, because there were quite a few local black musicians who were part of that band, and it was then pre-recorded, so they would mime to it. Some of it was, I'm not quite sure who the actual recording musicians were, because Joel brought those with him. But but then some of it, like the singing, was actually done live.
Right.
By the, what's her name? Maria Howe. She's a wonderful singer. So it's a combination of the two, pre-recorded that you mime to, as well as live music on the set.
So did you then go to the recording session for the soundtrack and then play those pieces on the set so everybody could then actually sort of pretend to play to them?
No, the recordings were done separately. So Joel would prepare those and bring them, and then we would play it. The sound, he was given to the sound man, and then he would play the music, and we would record the any additions to it that we needed to there. But it was mostly mimed by the musicians. But there are some scenes where you can see where they're actually playing, and they are playing. That's live. I mean, some of it is live, and some of it is pre-recorded and played back on the set.
Wow, that's terrific. And another great aspect of this episode, in addition to the music, is just the overall production design for Colosimo's restaurant. It's absolutely incredible, and it, totally evokes that atmosphere of the 1920s. What sort of conversations did you have with the production designer about recreating the Roaring Twenties in this episode?
Again, it's pretty well understood what is needed. You see, now that particular location, Colosimo's, it was very exciting. The place that we chose to do this was, and we were shooting it in Wilmington, the basement of an old, I don't know, restaurant or something that was unused, which became that jazz club.
That's amazing.
I always enjoyed working. I always try and choose a location rather than a set, rather than build a set, because that always has its own peculiarities and madness, and I thought it fitted in there very well. I can't quite remember exactly, but we found this building, and then you would have talked to the production designer how to make it work for you, and how to convert it into what you need. But they are wonderful professionals, and they, the set dressing and the costumes were wonderful, very, very good. I mean, my job is really quite straightforward and easy one, because you have such wonderful artists that work with you. That's wonderful thing about working on film. You work with a group of people, and it's a collaborative thing. So the director is sure, it's important, but you have a job to do as a director, as the production designer, the set designer, costume, makeup. They all have a job to do, and that's what they do. And if you have a good team, which we certainly had, my job is straightforward.
Yeah, it sounds like there was just a phenomenal team of people working on this series, and George and Rick were really intentional about who they were selecting to join them in this absolutely amazing adventure of producing this television series. Now, one of the main characters of this series, Sidney Bechet, sort of starts off as, somewhat of an unlikable character, but Indy sort of proves to him that he's genuinely interested in learning how to be a jazz musician. What was it like working with the actor who played Sidney Bechet, Jeffrey Wright?
Yeah, he was at that time quite a young man. He hadn't had many film experience before this, I don't think. I think he came out of New York Theatre. Rick suggested that I see him, and he was absolutely wonderful. He was so well prepared. Jeffrey just picked it up, and I think to be Sidney Bechet, rather than trying to pretend to be Sidney Bechet, is what I'm saying, you see. That is the difference, you see. He didn't have to put on a funny voice or, but he certainly picked up certain of his mannerisms, I'm sure, whatever he could find, or the way he plays, his enthusiasm, his love of music. And the little suggestion there that he says, I think I might go to Europe at one point because of the conflicts that the black people are having. Now, shooting this episode, I worked with wonderful black actors in this. Jazz, blues, gospel. I remember going to a congregation where they sing, and it was a real education for me to be in that place and see what an important thing gospel is to black people, how it is so, they come together and it is such a happy and a life enforcing thing. It was absolutely wonderful. I thought it really moved me.
Now, another terrific scene in this episode is this dinner scene between Indy and CJ, these two characters. They reminisce sort of about fighting during World War I, which creates this really forceful conversation about, the issues of racism in the 20th century. Now I'm curious, during conversational scenes like this that have so much dialogue, what role as a director do you have to do as far as cinematography and visual things in order to enhance the dialogue? What do you try to do during scenes like this?
Usually, in a scene like that, you would probably rehearse it maybe once, maybe twice, if necessary. But usually, I like to shoot as early as possible without much rehearsal. So if the actors are prepared and ready and know their lines, then you can go into it pretty much straight away. And if at all possible, you always shoot a master shot, one that sees everything. And doesn't matter how many errors or gaps there might be, hesitations, you shoot it like that. Because then you go in after that and shoot all the close-ups that you need, that you know you need. So you have a full coverage so that you know that you can build a scene in the cutting room the way you want it. You can extend it, you can cut it down. So, as I say, if the actors are prepared, you don't really have to do anything else. Sometimes you might talk to an actor and suggest something needs to be emphasized a bit more or a bit less, that kind of thing. But other than that, you just cover the scene, shoot it, and give it the coverage that it needs. That was certainly the way George wanted us to do it.
Yeah, and I mean it's such a successful scene. I mean it's just like the tension and sort of the emotion is so palpable, and you really feel like the lines are really shining through there. So it's a terrific scene. Another great aspect of this episode too is sort of kind of in the second part, getting to see Ernest Hemingway and Eliot Ness solve this murder mystery against Al Capone. And one of the most exciting and suspenseful scenes in this episode is this massive warehouse battle and car chase. Now, with any action scene like this, do you prefer detailed stage directions in the script, or do you like having a little bit more flexibility to make your own decisions on the spot?
Well, it's a bit of both, because some things have to be defined, about certain characters, or some of the characters, or some particular specific actions that have to be which are part of the script. But there are other things around it that are not, that you shoot because you think this has, so it's a combination of the two. In that episode, I actually had Ben Burt shoot some of the second unit in that episode, in that warehouse.
Oh, wow.
Quite a complex sequence of, action, and the shootout and the swinging on that crate, flying across the warehouse there. And, yeah, it's mad. It was a great thing, and much fun to do as well.
Now let's move on to some closing questions here. From my understanding, you were also the primary director for all of the Old Indy bookend segments that were shot in Wilmington, North Carolina. Now, unfortunately, all of this footage, got removed for the DVD release. But do you have any stories to share about your experience working with George Hall?
Well, he was pretty straightforward. George was cast by George, and so he came ready-made with makeup and eye patch and so on. Um, I suppose if you're going to have a 80-plus-year-old Indy, he was that's what he would be, I guess. I'm not quite sure if Harrison Ford would agree with that,
Yeah.
but it was nice working with him. Um, Again, he was very well prepared, but it was a bit strange. All of those scenes, they were a bit. I thought they were a bit forced, and I think George realized later, once they were all put together. I think some of them are a bit more successful than others.
Well, I mean, like some of the old indie bookends, I think are successful. I mean, for example, the you might remember the one for Petrograd, where Indy's in the museum and he sees that picture
Yes.
and he realizes that the date is incorrectly marked, and so he tells this museum curator that he's in the photo. Whereas some of the other ones are a bit more comical and it's a little bit less, I guess believable that Indy would really be doing some of these things at that age. So
Well, that's it. He was trying too hard, I think, to make something of something, and it didn't really. It wasn't needed, I don't think.
yeah. Regrettably, the show got canceled by ABC in 1993. However, we've learned from some of the other writers that George Lucas had planned for Young Indy to lead directly into the feature films, and supposedly he had this extensive timeline detailing almost 70 individual stories that were going to be developed into full length episodes. Was there any indication while you were working on the series that you would return for season 3 to direct other episodes?
Well, if it was to go on, perhaps. But you see, I already spent so long working on the series that it was nearly 4 years of my life.
Wow.
And in a way, it was a wonderful thing. It was easy. It was very friendly. I loved it all. But I had neglected my other commitments, turned away things because this was so easy and so nice to do. So as far as my career is concerned, it didn't do me any favors, I don't think.
Now, there were some additional scenes that were shot to connect the DVD episodes. Did you work on any of those at all?
I think I did some. I can't quite remember because when he started to rearrange them, I'm not sure about that because I remember doing some pickups for other episodes that I didn't do just because I was there. But I can't recall exactly what they were now.
So, one final question here. As you reminisce about the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles nearly 30 years later, what did you take away from the experience? What impact has the show had on you as a filmmaker and as a person?
Well, it was a very pleasant experience. It was wonderful to go to these various locations to work with the people that I work with. I think for any filmmaker to spend time at Skywalker to work with George and Rick, it was a pleasure. Hard work, but very pleasurable, and I think the series stands up even now because I haven't looked at it for some over 20 years, and I just looked at some of these episodes now again, and they're very strong. I think they stand up very well, and I think the ambition George had of education and entertainment at the same time was ambitious and a good thing, not an easy thing to combine. So yeah, look, I only have positive things to say about it.
Well, Carl, thank you so much for taking the time to join me here at the Indiana Jones Universe podcast today. It was an absolute pleasure and a privilege to get to speak with you about this phenomenal television series, and thank you for sharing so many wonderful stories with me and the entire Indiana Jones fan base. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure, and thank you for inviting me again.
It was great to have you, and thank you all for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to our podcast, leave a review, tell other people what you think about the show. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can visit our website, www.theindianajonesuniverse.com. You can email us from there, and you can also find us over on X. You can join our community of indie fans and listeners. Over there, you can find us at the Indie Universe. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Once again, I'm Will.
And I'm Carl Schultz. And until next time, so long, Dr. Jones.